What led you to search for something like Primer?
To be totally honest, I saw an ad for Primer. At the time, we were a metadata customer and was getting the feeling that that product was a little bloated for what we needed. We didn't need as much campaign orchestration as we did just really fantastic audience building across our ad channels. And I think the particular ad was about the match rates in Primer, which is very important, right? It's one thing to be able to build the audience. It's another thing altogether to be able to match against that audience in the various ad platforms, right? And so that's what it started the conversation. But really, ultimately, the strategic driver of that was that our company has very, very specific niche audiences that we're trying to go after. For me, it's very, very important to have some mechanism to be able to, as much in real time as possible, make adjustments to our audiences based on their sales engagement, based on their intent data, based on that individual's persona or job function. I can't operate without some tool to be able to help me do that. That's the primary use case for us right now with Primer, is just building really great targeted audiences against our ICP.
I want to circle back to your audience strategy in just a minute. I'm curious though, how did you go about evaluating us versus metadata? What were sort of your criteria and what were the results?
I really wanted to understand how Primer builds the audiences, what were the various data sets that were getting pulled together. I really wanted to understand what the process of building the audiences were. I wanted to understand how it would integrate with our existing tech stack, which we use Salesforce. The direct integration with Salesforce was a definite kick in the right direction for us with Primer. But really wanted to just understand, how are my peers, their use cases, how do they use Primer? And then just really getting a sense for, was this claim on the audience match rates as good as you all were claiming? And I think we even did a couple of test runs that were definitely part of giving me the confidence that Primer would be a good decision for our company.
So you're saying our match rate was better than metadata?
Honestly, the match rate is, and it's only improved over time, which is
Yeah,
really exciting. But again, it doesn't really matter if you could build a great audience,
right.
and only 30-40% of them actually get pushed through. What good is that really going to do you, especially for us? Because oftentimes our audiences are less than 50,000 individuals, right? We are really segmented in the way that we think about who we're going after. So that match rate becomes really important if you don't want to be paying $1,000 for a click, right? Like, I mean, you want to have a nice sized audience. Obviously, you want to be in front of the right people. That's a big part of it for sure.
Got it. Okay. And then, so coming back to it, what you were alluding to, these different types of audiences that were important for you to build. Could you tell us a little bit about what your initial audience strategy was and how you were looking to measure the effectiveness of your audiences?
So at our company, Zylo, we're spearheading a new industry. We're building a market, SaaS management. We help organizations manage all their software assets that are cloud-based, Salesforce instances or Microsoft 365. We help them control that. The reality is that there isn't that isn't a super established niche yet. For example, we just had our first Magic Quadrant just released last year. We can essentially serve any company that has software, right? We use 6sense, and we use that initial intent layer to understand what accounts are in market right now. And then from there, we are very much focused on the enterprise, even more specifically focused on global enterprise. So that chops the audience down as well. And we sell into buying committees. And often that is represented by an IT buying group, but procurement's going to be involved. Finance is probably going to be involved. Executives are probably going to be involved. So it's important that we market to those different cohorts within those different personas within the organization as well. So with Primer, we're able to take that initial 6sense intent data, which then goes into Salesforce, and then use our direct Salesforce integrations to pull into Primer, the great Primer tools to build audiences based on those individual roles. So you can see how very quickly we can go from essentially any company with software all the way down to IT folks in enterprise organizations at accounts that are currently showing intent looking for SaaS management. That's a big example of how we use the tool sorted data. You could get some version of account based from 6sense, for example, but the problem is that you have to go through their networks, and my trust is not as high, right? That instead of using the actual ad platforms. We can do
And
the account level
you
stuff
mean
there,
they're,
so you can advertise to an account level in 6 Sense, but not the individual, not the personas.
that makes a ton of sense. Has that strategy evolved over time, or are there other layers that you've added to it?
Yeah, I would say one of the things that we've started to do a lot more of is marketing into our active sales opportunities. So that's yet another layer of what I love about the Primer tool, because as soon as that opportunity gets marked as an active opportunity in Salesforce, the Primer audience then gets adjusted, and then that gets pushed into the various ad platforms. And I have a high degree of confidence that I can tell my CMO, my COO, yes, we are already marketing to that active opportunity, because that all happens essentially in real time with those integrations. So that's one example of something that we're doing a lot more. Another thing we're always looking at is how do we sort of build that very top of the funnel, and do we expand? To tell you a really exciting thing that happened just this week. We were going after, I don't want to share the vertical just in case a competitor's listening, but we are going after a very specific vertical right now based on some historic performance in that vertical. With my CMO sitting next to me, I was able to say, okay, well, let's look at it real quick. So I copied one of our IT audiences that I knew already had the titles that we'd like to go after, right? Because we'd already built them. And then just applied the filter for that vertical. I almost said it out loud in Primer, and in real time I was able to say, well, it looks like there's about 75,000 IT director and above that we would go after in this vertical that qualify for all the other criteria we need to be looking for. And we did that in 5 minutes in Primer, and she was like, awesome, well, it looks like there's an audience, we could go ahead and get this going live. And then all it takes is pushing that audience into my ad platforms like Google and LinkedIn, and then assigning them to the campaigns or building a new campaign for them, for example. And that just happened. I mean, that literally did just happen this week. I don't really know of any other way to do that. And I think what's so cool about Primer is it just allows us to do things really, really fast. Anyone that's going after really specific vertical or niche, or using intent data like we are, it's just a really powerful tool to narrow down your audience at the individual level.
Yep.
There's a lot of tools that use the account data, but to get down to those individuals, that's the tricky part.
That's great to hear. And we've talked about the audiences and the who. Could you talk about the where, how you're deploying those audiences and where you're using them?
Yeah, absolutely. So we primarily use Google, both paid search, we're doing a lot more with Performance Max. We started to actually see that channel really kind of grow for us, which I would account a lot of that to Primer and being able to push those audiences in. We also use LinkedIn, obviously. That's when we need to know for certain that these accounts are being hit and these roles are being hit, and at what rate.
PMax is so interesting because I think a lot of B2B marketers tried PMax once and saw just crap leads coming through.
Right.
What kind of audiences from Primer are you putting in your PMax campaigns, and how are you getting quality conversions from them?
So we'll do a little bit of a blend. What we'll do primarily with Primer is we'll start with our kind of top level, just general intent audience. We have data to lead us to believe that these accounts are researching SaaS management. So we'll take that group and then we'll segment it based on our personas, our key personas that we're going after, because what an IT individual cares about is wildly different than what that procurement. So they need to see completely different ads, obviously, or it's a waste of money. And then within the Google layer, we'll actually use Google's retargeting in PMax. So it's almost like Primer helps us build a bigger awareness audience, and PMax is a lot less expensive than a Google or LinkedIn awareness ad, for example.
Right.
So we'll use that, and then we'll use Google's own retargeting capabilities in those Performance Max campaigns. And that's really where the conversions happen.
So you've got sort of two types of audience signals in PMax. One is the Primer audience for awareness, and then there's a subsequent retargeting signal.
Exactly right. That's exactly right.
And then search. Search is not a lot of people use audiences in search. Could you elaborate on that a bit?
One of the things based on your input that we did right up front was create an exclusion audience, because again, we are just always trying to move up market. So we created some exclusion audiences that we use there. Page search is already incredibly expensive, as we all know, especially when you're going after hyper competitive keyword groups. We have just started experimenting a little bit more using the Primer audience signals for search campaigns. I can't report back on a lot there yet, but just even having that capability is exciting, because we can be that much more focused on even, our search campaigns as well.
So that's
Yeah,
different from the exclusion audience. That's saying, hey, we're only going to show ads to an inclusion audience.
that's
Okay.
right. As a B2B marketer, sometimes you feel like you're just so far behind the curve on what B2C is doing because of the targeting that can happen with B2C. But I think Primer almost gives you that sense of you're catching up with B2C because you can create these audiences that are so focused on what you're trying to accomplish as a marketer. And you can do it so quickly. I think one of the things that I love about Primer is, again, that real-time updating because we're connected to our Salesforce. That's incredible. That way, we also know once something becomes an opportunity, we can stop sending our normal ads to them. Or when they're a customer, we can turn on the customer ads. It's just that all happens in real time and it's getting pushed into the right audiences for us on our behalf without having to manually go in and move things around. I think the longest I've ever spent building an audience, and these are very important motions for our company, is like 15 minutes. And then once you've created your initial audience, the fact that you can go in with a fine-tooth comb and say, oh, wait a minute, those types of titles aren't good, or this type of industry we're not really focused there. And then Primer shows, okay, now your audience has gone down by 15,000 more people, or it's gone up because you've added some new, or option. So yeah, I mean, that to me, that's so cool. And I don't know of any other platform that can do that.
That's great. Brass tacks though, what kind of performance have you been seeing? How do you gauge the ROI?
Absolutely. So here at Zylo, the marketing organization is 100% responsible for our pipeline. So it creates a great relationship with sales where once they've qualified that opportunity and said, yes, this fits our ICP, then sales takes that over. And those conversions beyond that point are the primary sales KPI. But everything up until that point is the marketing KPI. And the way that gets measured is what is our investment in marketing programs, and then what is the associated pipeline from that investment, and always trying to hit a 10x investment to pipeline. We're able to consistently do that with Primer, which is awesome, and I'm really proud of that. But I think what's even more awesome for folks that are in a similar seat to me is we're also doing it against going up market. And we all know how hard that is, right? And we keep chopping the floor. It keeps going higher and higher. What we consider up market literally like every other quarter. And we're able to produce. So it's one thing to produce that return on the investment in terms of the pipeline, but then also being able to go in at all of our executive reviews and say, oh, and by the way, you told us to go up market. We just did it again. Our sales qualification criteria has just gotten tighter and tighter and tighter as this company has matured. The reality is that we continue to hit that goal, even though that goal gets tighter and harder to hit, which is hugely important. And Primer is a huge part of that. When I'm on a board meeting or I'm in a go-to-market call and I hear that we need to pivot, or we need to go after a new market, or we need to put all of our focus in a specific area, I just don't have even the slightest moment of any anxiety because I know I can do that with Primer the moment I come back to my desk. And again, I just don't know of many tools you can use to do that at the account level, but also continue to focus on the
Right.
titles, the job titles.
And extend it across, right, all these different ad platforms.
Every ad platform has its strengths and weaknesses too.
Yeah.
If you only help me in LinkedIn, it wouldn't be as valuable as the fact that you can also help me. And if we want to move on to Meta, right, we certainly can.
This is great, Chris. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the support and the kind words.
I've told anyone that would listen, honestly, that is in a similar role to me, what are you doing for your targeting? And if they don't know about Primer, I'm happy to mention it to them because it does exactly what we need.